Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic, let's do it. Serious. What is the most unlikely, unbelievable, or crazy story that you experienced or one of your friends that is nonfiction? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I'm the oldest of 6 kids. One passed away as an infant. My 2 younger sisters and one of my younger brothers used to like to push their mattresses together on the floor downstairs on the weekends and watch movies or sleep. My youngest brother still slept in his crib upstairs as he was still too young to roam the house at night, as we had 2 staircases leading to the basement that he could easily fall down. One evening, as my sister and brothers were about to fall asleep watching a movie, my youngest brother appeared at the bottom of the stairs. It startled them awake and confused them, as he should have been in his bedroom sleeping. They asked him what he was doing. He just smiled, then turned around and ran around the corners of the staircase. My sister followed, but when she reached the bottom of the staircase, he wasn't there. It wasn't possible. The kid had to climb stairs on all fours still, and it took him minutes to climb down. Confused, my sister ran upstairs and asked my parents what my little brother was doing downstairs. They checked on him, and he was in bed sleeping. All 3 of my brothers and sisters cried hysterically that night because they knew what they saw, and it didn't make sense. They still swear by it today. Every bit of this is true and happened to a couple friends and me. I grew up playing pool, and going out of town for the weekend to play a tournament was common. My friend and I were in our early 20s on a tight budget, so we decided to carpool and share a hotel room at the next tournament. We even found a 4th guy, Bert, to ride along. I'd only met Bert once prior. He was a huge redneck with a wandering eye. Intimidating and drunk might best describe him. On the 3-hour ride to the tournament, Bert was already drunk and talking crazy shit about his wife. Apparently they were going through a divorce, and he was not happy about it. He eventually starts describing the fight, where he has her on the floor with his foot on her neck. He's vividly describing choking his wife to people he barely knows. What the F? So anyhow, we all make it back home from the tournament, and the following Monday I get a call. It's the cops. Holy shit. They ask me the strangest questions about Bert. Did he have mud on his shoes? Did he mention his wife? What was his demeanor like? What the F? Weeks later, I would find out what really happened. Bert murdered his wife that Thursday night. The next afternoon, he gets in my car for a road trip. That fight he described in the car wasn't just some fight. That was the murder. I went on a road trip and shared a hotel room with this guy. Holy effing shit. One night last summer, I was walking my dog in the backyard when I heard a mumbling sound coming from the gate on the side of the house. Suddenly, my dog goes crazy and barks like her life depends on it. I ran to the side of the house to find a burglar about to smash my window in. I frantically pick up my dog and shout, "What are you doing?" You would think that the guy would run off after being caught red-handed, but instead, he turned to me and responded in a calm, deep voice, "My friends are almost here. You should go." I bolted inside the house and called the police. I locked all the doors and hid in the locked bathroom with my dog. After a few minutes, I hear more voices. The guy wasn't bluffing. At this point, I'm holding on to my spoiled puppy, praying that nothing happens to us. The police arrived and caught one of the guys almost immediately, but the others hopped over the wall and fled into the hills. A police car was stationed in my neighborhood for a few months after the incident, and we never heard more from the bandits. I guess this can be considered creepy since nobody really expects it to happen to them. About 10 years ago, when I was 8, I was visiting my dad at his house. My stepmother was in the kitchen and I was in the family room. We both saw my father wearing a red flannel shirt and blue jeans walk around the corner from the living room and start walking up the stairs. I followed him and called his name as he went up the stairs. He turned back and looked at me, got to the top of the stairs and went around the corner. I called his name again, and then from the living room, my dad popped his head up over the couch and asked what I wanted. He had been asleep on the couch the entire time, yet both my stepmother and I clearly saw him, wearing the clothes he had on the whole day and all, go from the living room up the stairs. It was the strangest thing I've ever seen. Both my stepmother and I still remember it and talk about it to this day. This isn't paranormal, but it's creepy. We used to live on a farm when I was younger. We didn't have any animals except a dog and a cat. It was a lovely place, and everything but my mom said that she felt like something was watching her when it got dark outside, even though we had never seen anyone outside. Some years ago, our dog died. We got a new one, a German Shepherd. It was both for guarding, training, and fun. As the dog grew older, it started to bark at something in the distance almost every night. It got along with our cat, but we came to the conclusion that it was the cat anyway, since it didn't have to be caged like the dog. Months went by, and my sister got a boyfriend. He used to hang out at our place a lot. One night, when he was about to go home, he felt like he wasn't alone. Right before we got to the car door, he turned around because he thought he heard something. The moment he turned around, he heard footsteps running behind him. He turned around once again and saw someone dressed in all black clothing running faster than ever away from him. He jumped into the car, locked the doors, and drove home. After that, we got more aware of what was outside our windows and checked outside to see if the dog started to bark a lot. I was about 22 years old in the summer of 2001, living in Chicago. Just before joining the military in June, I was at a party with some friends and decided to walk home after heavily drinking and smoking. Next thing I know, I'm being woken up by police and 3 police officers and 2 park rangers. I somehow, and still to this day do not remember how in the hell I fell asleep on a bench right next to the Gateway Arch in St. Louis, 5 hours away. To top it off, after I got home later that day, I received a message from the Nebraska State Police on my voicemail asking why my car was left on the interstate and that it had been towed to such and such a place. After reporting the car stolen and placing a call to the NSP, they only fingerprinted the car. They got a hit, a man on parole for robbery and negligent homicide who lived in Michigan. I have zero recollection of that evening except that I was at a party and was walking home. Thanks for reading. Maybe you got abducted, or maybe you just had a really good night. Back in the mid-1980s, just before my parents got married, they bought a house together in my dad's hometown. Because of my mom's values, she wouldn't let him move in with her until after they'd consummated the marriage. So while he lived with his parents across town, she lived in a pleasant 4-bedroom home in an equally pleasant town of roughly 800 people or so. She decorated the place and converted a shed on our property into an art studio where she did her paintings. One night, she was out in her little studio when there was a tapping sound on the window. When she went to look at it, she found a pink paper heart taped to the window. She went out to investigate. Nothing. She was understandably a little freaked out, not having found my father, and when she asked him about it later, he swore he had nothing to do with it. When it happened again a few weeks later, they called the police. Now, this is all happening in a very rural part of the Midwest, with so few people to police and the town so safe anyway. They didn't have a police force of their own at the time. Instead, once a night, a deputy from the sheriff's office would come patrolling around for an hour or two and then move on to the next little town. We had a good sheriff, one of those local legend types who people still talk about and fondly to this day. And when Mom came to him, he promised to send a patrol car by her house around that time, all while this was happening. And it really all seemed pretty harmless and to the point. Then, one night, she was out later than she intended to be, working on a painting when the metal door of the shed was slammed. Whatever hit it started pounding on the walls, and eventually a man's voice yelled out, "I know you're in there, beautiful. I could see the light on." She told me it went on for 20 minutes or so. He'd scream about all the ways he wanted to violate her and smash on the door for a while before making a few laps and trying it again. Finally, he scampered off in a hurry when the deputy came by. He didn't catch him or even see him in the act, but he found Mom completely terrified and helpless. As if that wasn't scary enough, he started threatening her the following week. She came home from work and found that on the cement ramp leading up to the shed, he'd written, "I'm going to kill you," in pink sidewalk chalk. That's when she started to really become terrified. Dad and the sheriff had a sit down with her. They told her to avoid her studio at night no matter what. This being back in the days before cell phones, there wasn't anything she could do to summon help if she got in trouble again. Dad left a gun with her and began training her how to use it while the sheriff guided her through the legal ins and outs of what counted as self-defense murder. Dad left a letter informing the mystery perp of this shed, along with a not-so-gentle warning that if he ever found the guy while he was visiting, he would kill him and make sure no one ever found him again. She started having Dad stay over a lot more, sleeping on the couch for a while. Things went quiet again. Then, one very rainy autumn night, it all kind of came to a head. Dad was across town with his brother having a few drinks. Mom had opted to stay in that night and put on the TV while she fell asleep. When she woke up, she was tapping on the window. It took her a moment to clear her head, but when she looked out, she saw a man standing in her window staring at her. He had a large monkey wrench, and he was tapping on the window in a steady rhythm. She could tell that he was really tall and that he had a beard, but his features were obscured by the light shining out at him, specifically his eyes. It was always so chilling when he described it to me, but she said that she couldn't see them because his glasses were reflecting the light on the side. Just two white reflections staring in at her while the grinning narcissistic maniac tapped on the window with a wrench. She dove on the other side of the bed and got the phone. She called my uncle's house and Dad answered. She told him what was going on. He and my uncle grabbed their guns, got in the car, and raced over there as fast as they could. To hear Dad tell it, he ramped up the car into the yard before climbing onto the hood. He could see someone running off in the freshly harvested woods, but he'd managed to get away. And it was dark. He fired at him a lot, but never hit him. What he did was scream out like a madman that he was scary, very effing serious about killing him if he ever saw him again. Mom relented to Dad moving in after that, and the guy never came around again. She never could bring herself to use her art studio again, and it eventually became the shed we kept the lawnmowers in. It took her a while to get comfortable with the idea of being home alone, but she eventually got over the ordeal. When she talks about it today, she says fairly convincingly that she believes he meant no harm. If he'd wanted to or kill her, she certainly could have. Instead, she's convinced, and I am not so much, was just some sick F who got the off scare the hell out of her. But I know I messed her up for a long time, and she says she still has nightmares about him banging on the window from time to time. They never did figure out who was behind it, and the cops never did either. To this day, it still creeps me out that someone like that could just be lurking around a town that is otherwise as peaceful as you could ask for. When I was 10, I had a dream about being in a barren playground with brown dirt and monkey bars placed aside from each other. It looked nothing like the playgrounds I saw in my neighborhood. In that dream, I turned my head, and in front of me, there's a girl sitting on a bench telling another girl beside her, "You can't tell anyone, okay?" before whispering in her ear. I wake up, and I'm utterly confused because there's no pilot, and the entire dream and background of it are meaningless to me. 2 months later, I moved to a different country, Japan, and in this story, I'm at a friend's birthday party. My Japanese speaking isn't good as my listening is, so I'm just standing in the middle of the schoolyard, staring at the monkey bars, and I can't help but think they look really familiar. I turn around just in time to see my friend, the birthday girl, whisper to a friend beside her in Japanese, "Don't tell anyone, okay?" This isn't as objectively horrifying as others will be, but it was still really freaky and can't be explained. I used to work as a historic houses as a caretaker, which basically means I cleaned it when no one else was there. A lot of their employees would talk about how the house was haunted, but I don't believe in that stuff at all, and I found the job really easy and peaceful. Important fact: the house was in the woods, not connected to any main roads. Visitors would walk down from the welcoming center, and the electricity for the whole place was turned on and off by staff every day using a circuit box near the front door. There was no other power. It was in the middle of the woods. One day I went to clean, and I was completely alone on the property. It was kind of a stormy day. I finished my work in a few hours, and I went through the whole house twice as always, going down a checklist of turning things off and locking things up. The last thing I did, and it had to be, because that's where I had to leave the checklist, was 35, and was to turn off the circuit, turn the electricity on for the whole house. So I turned it off, locked the door, and took one last walk around the perimeter of the house to make sure all the windows were shut. As I turned the corner, I thought I saw something move in the house, but I figured it was just a dream. And then one of the lights inside the house turned on. I freaked out because it either meant that someone was in the house and had been there the whole time, or that the house was effing haunted as shit. I considered both things and ran like hell because I'm a small lady, and if the place was getting robbed, I sure as hell wasn't going to defend it. I went back to work a few days later. I hadn't been robbed and no disturbance had been picked up by the outside security cameras. I took one of the other staff members and I told him about what had happened, and he said that it was a ghost. I still don't know what to think. I've tried to justify it by saying it was some freaky electrical thing because of the storm, but I'm glad I don't work there anymore. It was weird. It happened about 8 years ago. I was 19 and staying at my family's shop. See, my family owns a magic shop, David Copperfield kind of tricks, and they lived above the store. Now, this wasn't a regular building. It was in fact a 200-year-old log cabin. Well, 2 cabins put together with a few renovations, but it's nice and it's a hollow in the mountains. My parents would often go on vacation in January and leave me alone to care for the store, and usually I would just sleep in the guest room for the week. I remember though that this house always gave me the creeps. I always kept the lights on in the house and always felt like I was not alone. I hated being there at night, but still I stayed. Too far of a drive to go back and forth all the time frankly, I couldn't afford the gas. But I knew something was odd with the house. It just felt wrong. It was almost like I could see things staring back at me from dark rooms. I would sometimes hear things, odd creaks of the sound of the doors moving. Side story, I just remembered this. About 6 months before this, it was my mom, dad, and myself working one day. We were gathered around the dinner table to have lunch at about noon. Our front door was tough to open and would make an awful racket, and with the old floors, you always knew when someone was in the store. We knew the store was empty and were about 20 feet from the front door. We sat down with our sandwiches when we heard the door open with sufficient force and close. I get up with my dad and we go to meet the customers. No one is in the store. We walk outside basically immediately. There are no cars in the parking lot and no one is walking around. We were alone from basically the time the door closed to the time we checked outside. It was at most 15 seconds. We were thoroughly scared at this point. One night, however, I laid down to go to sleep, like usually. I locked the door to my room, habit, and went to sleep. At about 2 in the morning, I checked later, I was woken up by what could only be described as a refrigerator being thrown up the stairs. I sat up from my bed, and the door to my room started getting banged on repeatedly, like someone was hitting it with both fists over and over and over and over. I reached for a knife near the bed and stood on the other side of the room, ready to attack anyone who came into the room. It was so violent, and yet this tiny door with the tiny lock held. Suddenly it stopped. No more banging, no moving, etc. I stood, rooted to the floor for several minutes before I walked towards the door and shoved a bookcase in front of it. I sat in a chair on the opposite side of the room and watched the door for probably another hour before I fell asleep in that chair, with the knife still in my hand. The next morning, I checked the house. Doors still locked, no windows unlocked. The alarm was still set. There was no one in the house that night because, except me, it still scares me every time I think about it. That's pretty wild. I hope that it all worked out for you guys and everything's okay. Crazy. This is a story my grandmother would tell of something that happened to her when she was younger and happened sometime around the mid-60s. First, a little background. The city we live in has a lot of parks, including many of those little fenced-in gardens in the middle of squares. The current name is based on Gaelic for dark, deer green place. Anyway, my grandma worked in a theater, and after work she would get that last bus home at around midnight, then walk a short distance home, past one of these fenced-in communal gardens, usually the local policeman. This was the day when people knew and were friendly with their local lobby, would meet her off the bus. One night, she was on the bus when some sketchy guy sat next to her and was generally being sketchy, asking her personal questions, etc. She eventually got up and stood by the bus driver. She was a regular on the bus and knew she could get some friendly chat from him to deter Mr. Sketchy. On getting her to stop, she stepped off the bus, and her regular escort, the policeman, was nowhere to be seen. To make matters worse, Mr. Sketchy jumps and gets off the bus at the same and last minute. He walks off into the opposite direction from her, but keeps looking over at her back and forth. The bus pulls away, and in the middle of the road is a huge black dog. A bit freaked out by everything, she starts off for her home at a fast pace. The dog follows a distance of about 20 feet, freaking her out even more. She turns a corner, heading to the section of her journey that takes her past the fenced-in garden. As she approaches the open gate, the dog sprints for her and stops about 2 feet from where she is. It then starts growling and barking, hackles up and going mental in the direction of the garden. This understandably is the final straw. She sprints for home, and the dog stops its barking and runs after, keeping a distance of a few feet the entire time. It's not like it can't catch her. It easily could, but doesn't seem to want to. When she gets to her building, it stops and just watches her go inside. She told my grandma the minute she got into the flat, and he looked out the window, no dog on or nothing. The next day, my grandparents found out that the friendly local cop had died the day before of a heart attack, and a few days later, there were reports that a young woman had been attacked. A few